Russia has denied allegations that its troops killed civilians in Bucha. Moscow has actually accused Kyiv of staging the killing. The United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres has meanwhile called for an independent investigation into the killings of civilians. To discuss this further, we're joined by Brooks Spector, Associate Editor at Daily Maverick. Brooks, always good to see you. Thank you very much for availing yourself this afternoon. You penned quite a comprehensive piece, and you start off by asking whether Ukraine can hang on or hold off the Russians.
Yeah, no, what I did was try to look at the specifics of the accusations that have come out over the weekend, basically, and put them in a larger context. That there obviously is a strategic military context for all of this, but drop back to the claims of war crimes, if you will, just for a second. A number of international human rights organizations have concurred in this, and the video and the still footage of the circumstances are graphic, compelling, and horrific all at the same time. And we have to, unfortunately, take any Russian claims that they didn't do it, it was somebody else, it was staged, it was arranged, it's all fake, with more than just a grain of salt, because if you recall, just before they invaded Ukraine, they said there would never be an invasion. We're not planning to do it, and so the credibility of Russian military sources is not of the highest at this point. Yes, of course, there are going to be all kinds of claims and counterclaims, but I think this one points to one very uncomfortable truth. Either the soldiers that were stationed in that attack on the northern parts of the country close to Kyiv, either they were out of control and behaving in a way that out of control troops have done historically throughout the ages, which is to pillage and loot and kill, or it's a matter of military policy. And if it's the latter, then we have to look at circumstances that would have taken place in Chechnya a decade or so before, and then even before that, or the Russian attack in Aleppo in Syria. So I think I'm reasonably convinced that these are examples of behavior by Russian troops. Whether or not they were ordered to do it is, I think, the question that remains. The other question that you alluded to, can the Ukrainians hold on? Well, they have, in fact, pushed the Russians back out of the neighborhoods near Kyiv, and partly that's because the Russians have now made a decision, apparently, to concentrate their forces on the easternmost part of the country, what is called the Donbas region, where ethnic Russians are largely the population, and which has been in an insurrection against Central Ukrainian Authority for a decade or so. But what that also means is that the pressure on Ukrainian forces near its capital have been greatly relieved, and it is now a strategic issue for Ukrainian forces whether they can move the bulk of their military capabilities to confront where the Russians will be next. And one marker that really hasn't been mentioned enough, I think, is that May 9th is a particularly special day for Russia. It is the day that the Germans in World War II officially surrendered. It is a day that has been commemorated ever since by Soviet Union and then Russia as Victory in Europe Day. And there are always parades on Red Square and in front of the Kremlin buildings and celebrations and remembrances. And this year, of course, they're going to have to somehow figure out some way to have a celebration in the midst of a battle, in the midst of fighting, which may or may not yet be to their advantage. And so I think in the next couple of weeks, we have to look very carefully and very closely to see if the Russians somehow contrive to declare victory and then basically move on.
I think what I'm hearing from you, especially where Russia is concerned, is that the best predictor of future behavior is past behavior. You speak of May 9th Victory Day, and you also talk about Putin's people, that domestically it's reported that he has some level of support or enjoys some level of support.
No, that's quite correct. I mean, and I think there are a couple of reasons for that. One is, naturally enough, a society in dangerous times, usually, not always, but usually people tend to rally toward leadership because leadership gives people the sense that they are being watched out for, that while they're under threat, they are therefore being protected in some way. But the other half of it, of course, sadly, is that virtually all of the independent media, whether it's broadcast or whether it's in print, has been shut down, and opposition figures have been bundled off to have a long conversation with government authorities at government expense without being able to go home. And even the internet is now increasingly restricted, controlled, and yes, of course, some people are using ad hoc virtual private networks and so forth, but the majority of people inside Russia depend on what is now government media, which has been slavishly supportive of the government. And as a result, people tend to feel, not surprisingly, that it's their government, they're doing the right thing, and so forth. And so the sense that Vladimir Putin's government enjoys a degree of popular support is not misplaced.
As we're having this conversation, we're showing buildings that have been violated. We're showing some leftover artillery on the floor, and just showing the overall wreckage in Kyiv. So you speak of the detritus of war, and what do you suggest should happen?
Well, eventually, I mean, once there is a negotiation for real, and once there is a peace settlement of some type or shape, there are going to have to be reparations in some way, shape, or form, because many thousands, many tens, hundreds of thousands of people have lost homes and property and lives. 10 million or more people have been made internal or international refugees. Keep that number in mind, and at the same time, there are several $100 billion worth of reserves that the Russians built up over the last number of years that are being held abroad in foreign-denominated currencies, whether it's Chinese or euros or pounds or dollars. It almost doesn't matter. Probably 300 or 400 billion of that is under very close scrutiny. Somewhere along the way, all those people whose livelihoods and families have been ruined are going to clamor for payment in some way, shape, or form. I mean, if you just look at the illustrations you were showing, it looks dreadfully grim, and the rocket attacks and the missile attacks on various parts of Ukraine have not stopped. In fact, continue even now. So we're going to see a very long, prolonged, difficult negotiation over the terms of any sort of peace agreement, and an even more acrimonious and rancorous negotiation over who gets to reimburse all the people who lost all the things that they have lost.
On that, please expand for us when you speak of reparations. How likely is that? I guess that is also informed by my very limited understanding of what we have seen or not seen on this continent.
Well, I mean, reparations have happened after various wars. The one that I would point to for this particular set of circumstances, after World War I was concluded, the Germans were forced to pay a very large degree of reparations to the Allied nations, particularly Belgium and France. After World War II, forcible reparations were made to Russia, then the Soviet Union, from a defeated Germany, mostly not cash, but mostly in the form of factory and production, what they call capital goods, the equipment to make things, which were disassembled and sent east. And there's a whole history, and if you want the lesson of reparations, to extend it back to its beginning, go back to classical history, the Roman Republic having defeated Carthage, and that goes back quite a way. The Roman Republic exacted reparations from Carthage, partly because they had been defeated and partly because they had invaded Italy at one point as well. So there are a whole series of them, and there are processes that have been used in each case, whether it has always fairly been administered or whether it's always been done in every war, of course not. But there are examples, there are precedents, and there are mechanisms. Last week or so, I wrote an article which called attention to the specific mechanisms by which this could happen, assuming the money would be put in escrow sufficiently for this. It's going to be a long and prolonged and ugly discussion about that, too, I'm afraid, and we won't see the end of it for quite a while. You and I will have a conversation months from now on this.